who can provide shelter and say, hey, you have the obligation to give that person shelter. That way, it actually gets done. And we can avoid situations like interwar Europe, where we've got a lot of people who need help and a lot more people trying to pretend that it's not their problem. O'Neill's not the only philosopher to question the value of talking about human rights. We've mentioned Henry Shue on the show before, who says that healthcare, shelter and food are essential if you are going to have any other rights. Pick any right you like the right to free speech or the right to an attorney. You can't use that right if you're dead. You also can't use it if you're under threat. If you are sick or in debt or poor, you'll trade away your rights bit by bit just to stay alive. And who would blame you? That's why Shue recommends that things like healthcare, shelter and food be seen as basic rights. Things that you need in order to have any other rights, and therefore things that should be provided to you free. And if he's correct, then the whole idea of human rights is way more demanding than we might have realised. We like to think that everybody has human rights, they're a human thing, but free healthcare, shelter and food for every human being? We could do that. That is literally a thing that we could do, it's within our power, but it's going to require some big changes, right? Well, Shue says it's either we make those changes or we give up on the idea of human rights entirely and admit that in practice, they're just for rich people. And the less money you have, the fewer rights you're actually able to use. In order to avoid making those big changes, the history of human rights philosophy is littered with examples of people trying to find exceptions to the supposedly universal rights of man. So we mentioned already how in interwar Europe people made all kinds of excuses for why they were just going to leave other human beings to die, but it goes back further than that. Philosophers like John Stuart Mill and John Locke loved to talk about liberty and freedom, but their systems explicitly contained exceptions for savages and brutish races. And the kicker was, they themselves were also to be the deciders of who is savage and therefore not deserving of rights. How convenient. This practice of making exceptions to supposedly universal rules caught on and is still going on. Like the founding fathers of the USA talked about liberty and justice for all, right? But they must have made some exceptions because they also owned slaves. Prime Minister Theresa May condemned the Chechenian use of concentration camps for LGBT people, but when she was Home Secretary, she deported LGBT asylum seekers to countries where they'd be imprisoned for being LGBT because they couldn't prove to her satisfaction that they were. There's been so much hypocrisy surrounding human rights that little wonder some philosophers have said that it's not really worth talking about them at all. As a final twist in the tale, in her book Social Death, Lisa Marie Cacho warns that there's a trap lying in wait here. The trap is that we go to the state and we demand that the state enforces substantive access to everybody's rights. When she says it's states that are treating people badly in the first place, to try and use state apparatus to fulfill people's human rights still buys into the idea that rights are something that governments give us, and therefore something that governments might take away. So it allows these same problems of statelessness, of not being recognised by any state, to potentially creep back in. The solution, she says, is to stop allowing the state to decide the value of human lives. Rather, she says we should allow people to value their lives on their own terms. And that means putting a stop to policies that value people based on how much they contribute to a particular understanding of how economies should work, or how much they cooperate with what their governments are trying to do. In part 1, I told you that story about interwar Europe, and in this part 2 I've thrown out quite a few disparate ideas without as much linking as I normally do. And no doubt, the ideas that I've been throwing out there reflect who I've read and what I think about politics as a person. Rather than convince you of any specific point, what I hope these videos have done is show you that there are alternative ways of thinking about human rights when it comes to refugees. If you'd like to know about any of the points of view I've touched on, there's some recommended reading in the description. $2 or $3 a month from you at patreon.com/philosophytube could help me pay my rent and make food. Rent in London is egregiously expensive, so anything you could do would be really, really helpful, and don't forget to subscribe.